Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm thrilled to be here, second Coach Connect Live of the year, and thrilled to be joined by Stephen Davis. As we dive in today, I'm going to quickly introduce myself before we dive into the topic together. My name is Eloise Eonnet, and I am the Director of Coach Connect here at the Muse. I'm also a career coach on our platform. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what Coach Connect is, it is the place you can find a trusted career coach to help you take the next step in your career. Whether you're thinking about a career change, whether you're actively in a job search, or if you're just looking to grow within your organization, you can work with a coach to help you gain the confidence and the tools you need to take that next step. And every month, I'm joined by one of our fantastic hand-picked coaches to have a conversation on a topic that's relevant to you. And today, we're going to be talking about the elevator pitch and how to nail it. It should be one of those things that's easy to do. It's just talking about ourselves briefly, but every day, I talk to clients, whether they're just starting off their career or whether they've been in their career for decades, and we all struggle with how to approach it and how to deliver it successfully. So I am thrilled to be engaged in this conversation with Stephen. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Eloise. It's always a pleasure to see you and talk with you. And this subject is very close to my heart, the elevator pitch. As you know, we really only have one chance to make a first impression. That's it.
Right. Yeah, that's it. That's all you got.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What I'd like to talk about is I'm going to give you my elevator pitch. And just to start off with, the views that I'm sharing are mine, based on the years of experience that I have as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, and as a corporate internal mobility performance coach. Mm-hmm. And I also am a coach on Coach Connect. And I would go to the wall for the Muse because it's opened so many doors for me, because it is really the number one platform in the world for job seekers. Number one.
Mm-hmm. So it really is.
It really is. And it's just an honor to be part of the team of coaches that are on the platform.
And well, we're thrilled to have you, Stephen. It's such a joy. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. It is for me as well. And when someone starts off an interview with, "So, Steve, tell me about yourself." You've got roughly 30 seconds to answer. And as a recruiter, I promise you that every recruiter is trained the same way, whether they work in HR or they work in an agency. We are all trained to eliminate candidates as quickly as we possibly can. As soon as we hear something that doesn't sound right, if we read something in a resume or a LinkedIn, it doesn't look exactly correct, the candidate will never know it. So to give an elevator pitch, we are all being judged and evaluated by what we say and how we say things. And I have a perception of who I am. When I speak with you, you're forming a perception of who I am based on what you're hearing. It may not be how I look at myself. So words are not thoughts. The words is having a goal without having a plan is only a wish. And the best advice I can share personally and professionally is when anyone is going through an interview and trying to answer that question, "Tell me about yourself," the goal is to make a connection, because there's only two things that need to happen to move on during the interviewing process. Number one, convincing the interviewer that you have the skills, the knowledge, and the experience to do the job as it's written. And number two, that your communication will fit in the culture. That's all this is about. So how you're answering the question, the interviewer is trying to figure out, gee, is his personality, is his behavior going to fit in my culture, in my company, in my team? And I'm going to shock you with something. Looking for a job is not about the job seeker. It's not. There's an invisible bridge that crosses over who the job seeker candidate is and what the interviewer wants to hear. And most people think they have to sell themselves. You don't have to sell yourself.
Right. Right. So we're diving into the interview version, right? Of tell me about yourself. That first answer, and this context is super, super helpful. Do you have a step-by-step or an approach that you think is useful to our audience to think about and use as they're preparing theirs?
I do. Thank you so much for asking. Most people, when I ask that question, they rattle off everything that's on their resume. So getting back to the point that you're being evaluated based on what you say and how you say it, people are interested in understanding how you communicate and how you think. So when you talk about, after I graduated school, got my degree, started in this job, learned so much, received great performance reviews, exceeded expectations, then I was hired by another company, learned a lot. You're telling a story. So the formula, step by step, is think about storytelling, because that's what interviewing is. Your elevator pitch is you're telling a story. And so many people give TMI. Every story has the same framework, whether you're reading a story to an 8-year-old child or you're answering, tell me about yourself in an interview. It's got 3 parts, a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right. And it builds on each other, right? It's not just a list of things that you've objectively done. It's how do you create a journey? How do you create direction in the story that you're telling about yourself?
Precisely. And it's also an insight into how you perceive yourself. It's emotional intelligence. And that's something that a lot of managers in HR and on the hiring side pay very close attention to. They look for EQ, because the 2 most important pillars of emotional intelligence are self-awareness and awareness of others. So if someone were to say, Eloise, what are your greatest strengths? If you were simply to say, that's a great question, instead of just going into an answer. Right.
So that self-awareness, right? I think that the problem that I see most people have is that they might know in the day-to-day that they're good at stuff, but they don't take the time to build that vocabulary and actually know how to talk about it. So I feel like a good first step might be to sit down and figure out, what are the things that I'm really good at? And then how do I then tell a story that has forward movement, where I'm building, where those skills are kind of being used and with action verb sentences, right? To tell a story about what you bring to the table.
I'm glad you used action verbs, because that is critically important. And when you're telling your story, if your story doesn't align with the job description, it might sound terrific. Is it going to elevate you to the next round?
Right. Yeah. And how long should an elevator pitch be in an interview?
I don't think there's a time limit. All I can say is I don't think it should be more than 30 to 50 seconds at the very most. Because within, like I mentioned, I believe within the first 10 to 15, there's some sort of an evaluation is happening based on what someone hears, right? I mean, it's like if someone says, tell me about yourself, and you go right into, well, I'm currently working. And then before that, it's more than Q&A.
Yeah.
So I think the content is more important than the timing. The time spent.
Yeah.
The content.
Totally. Right. Yeah. Something I like to say to clients that I work with is, we've all been to the movies where we feel like we've been sitting there for the whole day. The movie just never ends, right? And then there's some movies that we love going to, and it goes like that, right? And they might be the same length objectively, but our experience is so different because we're engaged in the story. And so thinking about an elevator pitch in that way of like, how can I, as the storyteller, engage in that content so that the person in front of me also feels engaged? We no longer need to really worry about the length rather than focus on that, because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. If the content is engaging and is personal and is telling a story, then everything flows.
You said that so well. I couldn't agree with you more, because engaging is very, very connected to connecting, if you think about it. So, it's so important, as as a coach, it's so important to do your homework, know your audience. Who are you speaking to? And when the person asks you, tell me about yourself, if you would have gone on that person's LinkedIn, looked at their profile, noticed something about their background that maybe have something in common with your background, oh, I'm happy to answer the question. I noticed we have some similarities. You went to Brandeis University. I went to Brandeis. You built a career find a connection.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a few things. I'm hearing find a connection, right? So it's about engaging the other person, connecting with the other person on a personal level, right? So do your research, do the work to really be curious about that person, even in the conversation. And on the other side, I'm hearing content. I'm hearing self-awareness and EQ are really, really important. So it's about understanding and doing the work ahead of time of finding that vocabulary to talk about your accomplishments and the skill sets and the competencies that you bring to the table, but then also telling a good story about it and how it might have impacted your growth, other people's growth, the goals of the organization, and really tell a story that builds upon each other that takes you to today.
Exactly. And as part of that, there's something called executive presence. And that is, in my experience, critically important. It's something that interviewers are aware of, acutely aware of. Their radar is up. They're looking at confidence levels. They're looking at how much clarity someone has in their responses. They're looking at how concise someone speaks.
And that's preparation, right? That's like, we can be really confident in real life because we're used to the things that we do every day, right? But then going into that interview, answering that question, it can't be the first time. There has to be practice. We have to know that vocabulary. We have to put in that work, is what I'm hearing as well.
Exactly right. In fact, one of the greatest things about Coach Connect is, I'm sure you know this, when people hire me more for interview coaching than any other service. And the great thing is, on Coach Connect, when somebody books interview coaching, we go on Zoom and we record it. And we send a recording if the client wants it, so that the candidate can see how they look, listen to how they sound, see how much connectivity they really are putting out in the universe. Right? So that's what this is about.
Yeah. Preparation and then practice. And I'm curious. So if we were to take, that's awesome. So much context, so many different approaches there and things to think about as people are building their answer to tell me about yourself in the interview. Another part that we had discussed in preparing for today, Steve, was answering that similar question in performance reviews, right? So how can you give us some context there about how you think about performance reviews and answering that first question that you might be asked when you're meeting with your manager?
I'm so glad you set me up for that one. Yes, that's a large part of my coaching. And what's really interesting is the performance review process has gone through an evolution. I would say over the last 5 to 8 years. There are companies like General Electric and Adobe and Microsoft and Accenture and Deloitte that completely eliminated annual performance reviews. They're now doing it continuously. So many other companies still are on the once a year performance review, where employees can be evaluated on their performance, be up for a promotion, be considered for a raise in salary. But many other companies are doing it quarterly. So I think it goes back to doing your homework. Managers, unfortunately, there's no university course on how a manager should conduct a performance review. I don't know of any university that gives that as part of their curriculum. So understanding your audience, again, the person's reporting to a manager. The manager reports to someone. So understanding, well, Steve, how did you do last year? I completed every project. There were some difficulties. I overcame all of them. I thought I did great. That's the exact wrong pathway to choose. Because think about it. What does the manager want to hear? And it's the same concept when someone's interviewing you for a job and they ask you to tell them about yourself. Just what do they want to hear? So you can never lie. However, as an attorney told me, there are many ways to frame the truth. So if you know that your manager is driven to meet metrics, and your manager is facing questions from their management team about performance, talk about them first. Well, when we started the year, you gave me these projects. I learned a lot about myself. And what I was able to do, I'm an individual contributor. If you're an individual contributor and you are interested in moving up in the organization and one day being a manager, you're going to be evaluated on your communication skills, your influencing skills, your leadership qualities. So even though you don't lead officially anyone, if you work with someone who's on the same grade level as you are, and you help them, and you train them, and you motivate them, those are all leadership qualities that you can discuss with your manager. And furthermore, you can say something like, I know you're my manager, you know so much more about the planning for the next 6 to 18 months for our business. I may not know anywhere close to what you know. If you're ever working on something and you think I can help you, please let me know. I'm available.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a few things. I'm hearing, number one, know your audience, just like any other interview, right? So understand your manager's goals, what's important to them, so that you can align the information that you're sharing to help them be able to look good to their boss, essentially, is like the simple way to put that, right? The other thing that I'm hearing is know what you want to achieve, right? If you want to be a manager within a year or two, it's about talking about the things that are building those blocks and showcasing that you're actively building those blocks towards that goal, right? So being self-aware about that and adapting your language to it. The other thing I'm hearing, which is really interesting, is that you're not focusing on like what I accomplished, but rather how I was successful. And it's using the soft skills, right? I influenced, it's communication, it's here's how I helped out this team, here's how I focused on that. It's really, you're focusing mostly on the how in order to talk about what you've accomplished.
You nailed it. It's the how. And you want to convince your manager that you exceeded expectations. Because a lot of companies use that ranking. Either you meet expectations or you exceed expectations, or you are below expectations. So if you use those words, my goal was to exceed your expectations. And it's also important to talk about what you learned. If you made a mistake, talk about it.
Elephant in the room, talk about it. Own that narrative, right? Yeah.
Exactly. 3 months ago, I was working on this project and I did something I shouldn't have done. The light bulb went off. I learned from it. And that made me wonder if I could collaborate with another team, I could add value to them and I could learn from them. So I'm going to ask you, would it be okay for me to collaborate with that team, even though it's not part of our group? That's managing up.
It's managing up. And the way that you're managing up that I'm seeing in that example is that you're showing up with clarity on what you want. So not approaching this performance review as a situation where you need to just talk about what you've done in the past, but truly having it be something active that you have a say in, and not expecting your manager to say, hey, Eloise, okay, so here are the things that I want you to accomplish in the next 6 months to a year, but rather saying, hey, like, I'm really interested in this. Is there opportunity here? And showing that you're active in that career trajectory of yours.
Exactly. And you've got to be honest. And it might even help you to start it off with, I'd like to share the progress I've made since the last review.
Yeah.
Because you know how the manager's thinking the same way.
Yeah. So if you were to kind of break down it step by step, right? So you go into your, you zoom in or you walk in, depending on how it works these days, right, to your performance review with your manager. You've prepared, they've hopefully prepared for the conversation. And they say, hey, like, so how's it been going? Because that's kind of the question I assume they'll ask. Like, do you have a structure that we could follow, or like some clear steps, like 1, 2, 3 of things that we could do when we're preparing to answer that question to be successful?
For sure. I think it should start off with what I just mentioned. This is where we were last performance review. And then just to prepare for today's meeting, what I have done is I've gone over a list of all the projects that I was tasked to deliver. And I would like to share with you some of the challenges I faced, some of the actions that I've taken, what I've learned, and I did make a few errors along the way. I want to share that with you. And then that formula should continue into where you see the manager today, where you see the team today, and any issues you've noticed on potential conflicts with colleagues that you might work with that the manager may not even be aware of. Where you can identify gaps. It's called gap analysis, where this is a strong team you built. We all love reporting to you. I noticed A, B, and C, and if you're aware of it, please tell me. If you're not, I put together a little roadmap on how we might improve the situation, if you're interested. So the whole goal is it's your performance review, but you're being evaluated on your influencing skills, on your communication skills, and on your executive presence, your behavior, and what you say and how you say things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah. So today we've looked at how to think about the elevator pitch, the answer to tell me about yourself in the interview. And we've also then just talked about how do you nail that in the performance reviews situation, right? So it's two different situations within work. One is when you're talking to someone who you don't know, theoretically, and it's about coming in prepared with that confidence, with the vocabulary, with that clear direction of where you're going, and building a story that has direction, that focuses in on the kinds of skill sets that you're good at, not just the list of things that you've done objectively, because that doesn't tell a good story, right? It's about really building momentum in the story that you're telling. And then in the performance reviews, it's similar, but you know your audience, and you can come in with a little bit more of a strategic direction, right? You have a little bit more say. It's because it's more of a conversation perhaps than the elevator pitch in the tell me about yourself interview situation, right?
Exactly. And what I'd just like to add to that is, even if you're in technology, it's so important to map what you do to your work and what it means to the company, and what your work means to the customers. If you're customer facing, or even if you're not customer facing, you could work in a call center where you're doing the technology, but you're not directly interfacing with a customer. So if you start talking about the impact that your work has, not only on your team, but on the manager's team, on the business of the company, and all the way through to the customer experience, that perception of yourself is going to carry forward when that performance review is over and the manager sits down and says, wow, last year Steve was here. This year he's talking to me about the customer and the team and the business. That's the goal.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, which I love, is that it's like we think of the interview as just a process that happens at the beginning of a job, right? When you try to enter the company. But what I'm hearing you say is that in fact performance reviews are also interviews to a certain degree, depending on what your goals are, right? And your opportunity to answer. So, you know, Eloise, how's it been going? Which is a similar question to tell me about yourself. It's just within a certain amount of time, right? How's it been going the past 6 months? You have to kind of think of it as a way of an opportunity to showcase what you bring to the table, tell a good story, and also drive towards your goals. Whether in the interview it's land the job, or here be seen for the work that you're bringing to the organization, and perhaps have more access to the next steps you want to take in your career.
Exactly. And when the manager says, Eloise, how are you doing? You should know what the manager wants to hear as a response. Manager doesn't want to hear, well, you know, I was really looking forward to meeting with you today. It's going great.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, but it's going to help you.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions coming in from the chat of asking for examples of answers, and I mean, I'd be happy to give it a try. Stephen, do you want to give a try of an example of what a great answer could be? And of course, they're all different. We're all different people with different experiences and backgrounds, right? But do you have a snippet of an answer that you could give to kind of give people a flavor of what it would sound like to answer that question in the interview?
Sure. If it's a performance review interview, what I would start off with is a project that gave me trouble. I was working on this. It took longer than I expected. And instead of reacting immediately, I've learned to sit down, organize my thoughts. Do you see, by going into that perspective, instead of just saying, well, I helped to implement a CRM solution, I had the CRM solution. I could have taken many, many options to deliver it on time and within budget, but I sat down and I thought it through.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you mentioned earlier. It's not what you do, it's
how you did it.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you say, Eloise?
So I'll do the flip, right? I'll do the one for the interview. The way that I think about it, and it's exactly what you were saying before, is we don't want to list what's on our resume. The resume is there for listing the objective things that you've done. They know those things. We can use it as a blueprint to help us tell a story, of course, right? But what I always say is, if you think of what you put in that pitch and that answer to tell me about yourself as bullet points of pieces of information that you want them to know, I always say, like, if you can't tell me how you did something well or what you might have learned or how you might have grown on that bullet point line, it's not even worth saying. Don't even keep it in your pitch, in your answer to tell me about yourself, right? So a version of this might be like, I'm going to say I went to college and I graduated, and I'm going to have 3 jobs that I'm going to pick. And I often say, pick and choose. You don't have to tell me every single job that you've had since you started your career. You can pick and choose the most relevant for the job that you're interviewing for, right? So I might say something like this, and I'm totally making it up on the fly, so like bear with me, it's not going to be perfect. And that's something else that I tell my clients. The first time, it's not going to sound good. So make sure the first time is not in the interview, right? Say it out loud before you go in, right? So a version could be like, Eloise, tell me about yourself. And I would say something like, gladly. And I would actually start with a little phrase like this. I'd say, I'm someone who really, really thrives when I'm working collaboratively with people. I really, really enjoy looking at problems and learning from my colleagues about how they might solve those problems and move them forward. With that, comes a lot of creativity and innovation, and I get really excited by those kinds of projects that really get me thinking and finding solutions, right? Then I might say, I graduated from Barnard College with a degree in psychology, and what I really loved about my time there is that it taught me a lot of structure. Thinking about processes and understanding how processes can evolve and adapt to a variety of different situations given the projects that I'm working on. See, there what I did is that I said, I didn't just say I went to Barnard College. I said I went to Barnard and I learned this key thing that's relevant back to what you were saying, Steve, right? Like what are the soft skills that I learned there that make me a great fit for this position, right? So then I might say, and then, I very quickly founded my own company. And in founding a company, gosh, you learn so much. I was incredibly independent. I worked really, really hard. The level of dedication was really high. And what it really taught me is how to ask the right questions to the people around me to help me find solutions. So again, and I'm making this up, and it might not be right what I'm saying, but it's a link, a moment in your career to something that you really, really learned in that moment. That's what makes it relevant to the person in front of you, right? So pick and choose the moments that are relevant in your career. Make sure, practice it, figure it out, speak it out loud until it feels right. But make sure you're connecting those moments in your career to key skill sets, personality traits, approaches. I would even say the key values, like building trust, right, with key partners to those experiences, and then close it out with opening up the conversation and being like, hey, given my experience, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today and to learning more about how I can help you achieve your goals. So that was choppy and I kind of broke it down, but it's really what Steve was saying of not just going through objective facts, but rather using those moments in your career to talk about the things that you've learned, the skill sets, the competencies that you've developed, which builds a strong story to why you're here today interviewing for that position. Steve, does that align with how you might do things?
Yes, very much so, Eloise, because, and I'll ask the audience, if you're reacting the way I am, based on what I'm hearing from Eloise, she's telling me how she arrived at where she is today.
Yeah.
And Eloise, I'm so glad that you did not use one word that I was listening for. And I'm so happy you didn't use passion. I'm passionate.
I'm passionate about.
Nobody cares. They care why you're good at what you do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
And there's some great words that I like to replace with that. So I'm really passionate about. I much prefer making them active. So it was really engaging. I was so proud. Like if you're a people manager, talking about being proud of your team speaks volumes, right? So I was really engaging. I was really proud of the work. I would say it was really exciting to see the impact, or that what happened as a result of the work that we did. So there's so much other vocabulary that you can use that's activated, right? I'm passionate about is a statement about yourself rather than an active word. So thank you for catching that. I'm glad I didn't say it, Steve, and I hope that you would have called me out if I had.
I would have for sure. And I'm so glad you brought up action verbs, because they are the most powerful tool that anyone can draw upon when they're getting a performance review, when they're interviewing for a job, when they're writing their resume, when they're writing their LinkedIn about section. Use action verbs.
Always. Because what you do is going to translate to the value that you create. And ultimately, whether it's a manager reviewing your performance or somebody interviewing at the beginning of a job, right? What they're looking to understand is how you are successful and the impact that it's had in the past, so that they can understand how it will have impact in the future, right? So they're really thinking about it as like, here's what I bring to the table. Here's how I've done it successfully. And you can lean into those soft skills, influence, communicating strongly, really focusing on processes, that kind of stuff. And then talking about the major impact that it had, bringing the team together, delivering projects successfully, happy clients, whatever the major impacts were. That's really key too, because the interviewer or the manager is trying to remember, is trying to get clear on the things that you're capable of achieving as a result of your approach.
Very true. Another thing I'd like to just add to that brilliant statement that you just shared is it's important to be concise, because I interview so many people. I work with so many people who start, giving me their elevator pitch, and it goes on and on. And, even a performance review where, 3 people on the team were out, and, Joanne called in, she had to go to California. Then Bobby couldn't make it because his in-laws flew in from Europe. And, less is more.
Less is more.
And going back to connecting when you're interviewing and you're giving your elevator pitch, give minimal information using as many action verbs as you can. And if you hear this silence, ask someone, by the way, I'm happy to share more details if you'd like, or we can continue. That may not sound very important, but if you're interviewing with a hiring manager and you're answering the tell me about yourself question, the manager is automatically going to assume if they hire you and they say, hey, Steve, remember that task I gave you 3 weeks ago? How's it going? Well, I did this, and this. If you'd like more details, the manager's audit. That's who they want to hire.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. And I think this is a perfect place to end. Unfortunately, we're past time. So I have to bring this to a close, even though I'd love to keep talking. But I love what you just said, because another thing that I think is so important is show up for these conversations with the mindset that you're already a team member. Act like you would if you were already on the team, because just to your point, Steve, like, they want to see you show up to those conversations like they want to see you show up once they've hired you or given you that promotion or whatever it is. So I honestly, I could just keep talking to you and keep diving in. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us, for your questions. We didn't get to all of them, but we will make sure to read through every single one and make sure to follow up with you if we can. So thank you for showing up. Hopefully this was incredibly helpful to all of you. Stephen, thank you for your expertise and your time. So glad to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you for your expertise and your time, Eloise. And thanks to everyone for taking time out of your busy days to be here. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next month.